Hello. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Wednesday here at Juana Iguana. No, it's not Wednesday, silly me. It's Tuesday. Obviously. Duh. How could I forget? It's Tuesday. It's Tuesday, which means we're streaming, we're hanging out, and we're reading, once again, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. How nice is that? On the last chapter, yesterday, oh, I want my book light. What happened? Oh, they made it out of the Arctic, basically, was what happened. Well, they traveled, they kind of like ventured into the Arctic, went through that whole like dangerous journey, but made it out. And now they're kind of heading toward the South Pole. Well, they're still in the Arctic, but I guess they got past the like apparently very, very thick ice, traveling under it. So, yeah. All right, let's get into it. Chapter 14, The South Pole. I rushed up on deck. There it was, the open sea. Except for a few floating icebergs and blocks of ice here and there was an endless expanse of sea. A whole world of birds filled the air, while myriads of fish swarmed the water, which, depending on its depth, varied from a deep blue to an olive green. The thermometer registered at 3 degrees Celsius, or 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Relatively speaking, it was as though spring had lain concealed behind the ice shelf whose far-off masses stood outlined against the northern horizon. "Are we at the pole?" I asked the captain with a throbbing heart. "I do not know," he replied. "We will take a bearing at midday." "But will the sun be visible through all the mist?" I asked, looking at the gray sky. However dimly it may shine, it will be enough for me," replied the captain. 10 miles from the Nautilus, toward the south, a solitary island rose to a height of over 600 feet. We were now approaching it cautiously, for there might be reefs beneath the surface of this sea. An hour later we had reached the island, and 2 hours after that we had sailed completely around it. It was 4 or 5 miles in circumference, and a narrow channel separated it from a large body of land, perhaps a continent, whose limits we could not see. The existence of the land seemed to lend credence to Maury's theory, for the ingenious American had indeed noticed that beyond the South Pole and the 60th parallel, the sea is covered with floating ice of enormous dimensions, never found in the North Atlantic. From this, he deduced that the Antarctic Circle encloses vast territories, since icebergs cannot form in the open sea, but only along the coastlines. According to his calculations, the ice masses around the South Pole form a vast cap whose diameter must be around 4,000 kilometers, or 2,500 miles. Meanwhile, the Nautilus, for fear of running aground, had stopped about 3 cables' lengths from a beach overhung by a majestic formation of rocks. Then the dinghy was launched, and the captain, with 2 of his men to carry the instruments, Conseil and I, jumped aboard. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. I had not seen Ned Land. Doubtless the Canadian still did not want to eat his words at the presence of the South Pole. A few strokes of the oars brought us to the beach, and Conseil was about to jump ashore when I held him back. "Captain," I said to Captain Nemo, The honor of being the first man to set foot on these shores belongs to you." "Yes, Professor," replied the captain, "and I do not hesitate to tread the soil of this pole. It is only because, so far, no other human being has done so." So saying, he sprang lightly on the sand. Clearly, he seemed full of joy. He climbed up to a rock that overlooked a little promontory, and staring there with his arms crossed, his eyes shining, silent and motionless, he seemed to be claiming possession of these southern regions. After 5 minutes of ecstatic meditation, he turned toward us. "Whenever you wish, monsieur." I stepped ashore, followed by Conseil, leaving the 2 sailors in the dinghy. The ground on which we stood was a long stretch of reddish volcanic rock, looking as though it was made of crushed brick. It was littered with slag, streams of hard lava, and pumice stones. There was no mistaking its volcanic origin. In some places, tiny curls of smoke gave off a sulphurous odor, indicating that the internal fires had still lost nothing of their power. However, when I climbed a steep escarpment, I could see no volcano within a radius of many miles. We do know, however, that in the Antarctic, James Roll discovered the craters named Erebus and Terror, still fully active on the 167th meridian, latitude 77 degrees 52. And then there's a footnote that says Ross had 2 ships named Erebus and Terror. Thanks, footnote. The vegetation of this desolate continent seemed very sparse. Some lichens or species of Yersinia melanoxtha spread out on black rocks, certain microscopic plants, rudimentary diatoms with cells placed between 2 quartz shells, long purple and crimson fucus thrown up on the shores by the surf, were all the signs of vegetable life in this region. The coast was strewn with mollusks, mussels, limpets, smooth cockles shaped like hearts, especially Cleos, with their oblong membranous bodies and their heads formed of 2 round lobes. I also saw myriads of Arctic sealows, each about an inch long, which a whale can swallow a whole school of in one mouthful. The water near shore was alive with these charming pteropods, veritable butterflies of the sea. Okay, this is bringing up a question for me. I'm curious about, about when the South Pole was first explored by humans, because I don't know. Because they're claiming to be the first ones there. 1911, yeah, it was before this book. That's so crazy, because 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea came out in 1890, I think. Apparently there's a movie. Okay. Yeah, 1870. So that's crazy. So this was released in 1870. So it's interesting how Verne takes all of these I mean it's science fiction, all of the exploring he's doing, a lot of it's made up because submarines hadn't been invented, and a lot of these fish that he's talking about probably hadn't been discovered either, or at least maybe they were talked about, but not like fully researched. And a lot of these things that keep popping up are like definitely fictionalized, you know, but from such a scientific standpoint. But even down to this, like no one had explored the South Pole yet. And that's just so interesting to me. Like how he's speculating what the surface of the South Pole is like and what it looks like with the volcanoes and whatever. Yeah. Okay. Among the zoophytes I saw in the deep waters some shrub-like corals, the type that, according to Ross, can live in Antarctic seas as far down as 3,000 feet. Then there are little alcinarans belonging to the species Procellaria pelagicea, as well as great numbers of asteroids peculiar to this climate, including the starfish that studded the soil. It's funny. But it was in the air that life was most abundant. Thousands of birds of all kinds fluttered and swooped about, deafening us with their cries. Others were crowded together on the rocks, watching us go by without fear, and even following close on our heels. These were penguins, which were so swift and agile in the water, where they are sometimes taken for the striped tunny, but so clumsy and awkward on land. They they uttered harsh cries, stood about in numerous groups, made few movements, and very loud noises. Among other birds, I noticed the Chionis, belonging to the long-legged wading family, as large as pigeons, white with a short conical beak, a red circle around their eyes. Conseil caught a few of them because, if well cooked, they can make an excellent dish. Dark brown albatrosses passed overhead with a wingspread of about 12 feet, justly called the vultures of the sea. Giant petrels, including a species called Quebratehuesos, named Bonebreaker. Ah, that's funny. A large hawk noted as a diver for fish. That was a footnote. With arched wings, which are great eaters of seals. Damiers, a kind of small duck, with black and white beaks, and finally a whole series of ordinary petrels, some white with brown bordered wings, others blue and peculiar to the South Polar Seas, and so oily, as I told Conseil, that the Faroe Islanders need only to insert a wick in them and light them. If nature had only provided them with a built-in wick, Conseil remarked, they would make perfect lamps. But that is expecting too much. Half a mile on, the ground was riddled with penguins' nests. These looked somewhat like burrows, so arranged as to make it easy for the female to enter and lay her eggs, and we saw many birds emerging from them. Captain Nemo later on ordered his men to hunt a few hundred of them, for their dark flesh is quite good to eat. These birds, with their slate-colored bodies, shaped like geese, white bellies, and yellow bands around their neck, uttered cries that sounded like the braying of an ass. They made no attempt to escape, and were easily killed with stones. In the meantime, the mist had not cleared, and at 11 o'clock there was still no sun. I was afraid it would not appear, for without it we could not take our position. How could we determine whether or not we had reached the South Pole? When I rejoined Captain Nemo, I found him leaning against a rock, looking up at the sky. He seemed to be annoyed and impatient, but what could we have done about it? After all, this powerful, daring man could not command the sun as he commanded the sea. Midday came and went without the sun having appeared for a single moment. It was not even possible to tell where the sun was behind that curtain of fog which seemed to turn into snow. "Tomorrow, then," was all the captain said, and we returned to the Nautilus through flurries of snow. During our absence the nets had been cast, and I was interested to see the kinds of fish that had been hauled aboard. The Antarctic seas serve to be a refuge for the large number of migrants fleeing from the storms of other regions, only to fall a prey, it must be so, to porpoises and seals. I noticed some southern sea scorpions, about 4 inches long, and a series of whitish, cartilaginous fish with livid stripes and covered with prickles, some Antarctic chimera, which have a narrow body 3 feet long, smooth, silvery white skin, and a round head, 3 dorsal fins, and a horn-shaped snout that curves down toward the mouth. I tasted their flesh, but found it without flavor, but Conseil thought it was good. The snowstorm lasted until the following day. It was impossible to stay up on deck. From the saloon where I was jotting down the incidents of our excursion to the polar continent, I could hear the cries of the petrels and the albatrosses as they swept to and fro in the blizzard. The Nautilus did not remain still, but moved along the coast for another 10 miles or so in a southerly direction, in that half-light that indicates that the sun is just touching the horizon. The next day, the 20th of March, the snow had stopped, but it was a bit colder. The thermometer showed 2 degrees below 0 Celsius, or 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The mist was lifting, and I hoped that we might be able to see our position that day. Since Captain Nemo had not yet appeared, Conseil and I were taken ashore. Here, too, the nature of the soil was volcanic. Everywhere there were traces of lava, slag, and basalt, but I was unable to locate any crater that had emitted them. Here, too, myriads of birds filled the sky. However, here were shaped their domain with vast herds of sea animals, which looked at us with their soft eyes. There were various kinds of seal, some of them stretched out on the ground and others lying on floating pieces of ice, while others plunged in and out of the sea. They did not flee at our approach, since they had never had contact with man before, and I reckoned that there was enough of them to supply meat for some hundreds of ships. "How fortunate it is," said Conseil, "that Ned Land didn't come with us." "What makes you say that, Conseil?" "Because that mad hunter would have killed everything in sight." "Well, I feel that everything is going a bit far, but I do think that we could not have prevented our Canadian friend from harpooning some of those magnificent animals. That would have upset Captain Nemo, because he does not believe in the useless slaughter of harmless animals." "And he's right." "Of course he is, Conseil. But tell me, haven't you yet classified those superb specimens of marine fauna?" "As monsieur well knows," replied Conseil, "I'm not very good in this field. However, when monsieur has taught me the names of these animals, they are seals and walruses. 2 genera belonging to the family of pinnipeds," my learned Conseil hastened to add, "order of the carnivores, group of unguiculates, subclass of mononopians, class of mammals, branch of vertebrates." "Very good, Conseil," I replied, "but those 2 genera, the seals and walruses, are divided into species, and if I'm not mistaken, we shall have the opportunity of observing them here. Let us go." It was 8 o'clock in the morning. We still had 4 hours before the sun could be observed at any good purpose. I led the way toward a vast bay set within a semicircle of granite cliffs along the shore. There I can truly say that as far as the eye could see, the land and the floating ice were covered with sea mammals, and unconsciously I looked for old Proteus, my mythological shepherd, who watched over these immense flocks of Neptune. Most of them were seals. They formed distinct groups of males and females, and the father guarding the family, the mother suckling her young. Some were of the calves, strong enough to walk, ventured forth on their own a short distance away. When the animals wanted to move, they would draw their bodies together and bounce forward, helped along, somewhat clumsily, by their cumbersome flippers, which, among the lammatin, their cousins, in the water where they are thoroughly at home, these creatures with their flexible spinal column, narrow pelvis, smooth compact fur, and webbed feet, swim magnificently. When nesting on land, they lie in most graceful positions. The ancients, when they saw the gentle features of these animals, their soft, velvet-like eyes, their expressive look, unsurpassed by that of the most beautiful woman, and their most charming postures, celebrated them in poetry, transforming the males into tritons and the females into mermaids. I pointed out to Conseil the advanced development of the cerebral lobes of these intelligent creatures. No animal, with the exception of man, has a greater brain. Moreover, seals can easily be domesticated and trained, and I agree with certain naturalists who think that, properly taught, they can be the most useful in helping man to fish. Most of these animals were asleep on the rocks or on the sand. Among these seals, which have no external ears, unlike otters, whose ears are prominent, I noticed several varieties of Stenorhymenicae, about 9 feet long, with white hair, bulldog heads, 10 teeth in either jaw, including 2 incisors in the upper and 4 in the lower jaw, and 2 big canine teeth in each jaw, shaped like fleur-de-lis. Among them slithered sea elephants, the kind of seal with a short, flexible trunk. These giants of the species were at least 30 feet long, Jesus Christ, and had a girth of 20 feet. They did not move at our approach. "Aren't these animals dangerous?" Conseil asked me. "No," I replied, "not unless you attack them. When the seal is defending its young, its ferocity is terrible, and it is not unknown to them to smash a fishing boat to pieces." "And they're quite right to do so," added Conseil. "I quite agree with you." 2 miles further on, our progress was halted by the promontory which protected the bay from the south wind. The waves form as they broke against the vertical rocks. From the other side came the sound of loud bellowing, such as can be produced by a herd of cattle. "Well," said Conseil, "a concert of bulls?" "No," I said, "a concert of walruses." "Are they fighting?" "Either fighting or playing." "If monsieur doesn't mind, I'd like to see them." "We must indeed, Conseil." So there we were, climbing over blackish rocks where the ground would suddenly crumble under our feet, or walking over slippery stones carved with ice. More than once I fell, hurting my back, while Conseil, who was either wiser or more sure-footed, never faltered, and would pick me up, saying, "If monsieur would be good enough to keep his legs further apart, he would find it easier to maintain his balance." When we got to the top of the promontory, I saw a vast white plain covered with walruses. The animals were playing with one another. Their bellowing was an expression of pleasure, not anger. Walruses are just like seals, as far as the bodies and limbs are concerned. but their lower jaws have no canine teeth or incisors, while the canine teeth in the upper jaw consist of two long tusks measuring as much as 30 inches in length and 12 around the base. These teeth are made of a very solid ivory that has no grooves, is harder than that of elephants, and does not discolor so easily. They are much sought after. Moreover, walruses are the victims of wanton hunting and killing by man, who will soon exterminate them completely, since the hunters slaughter the young and the pregnant females indiscriminately, destroying more than 4,000 every year. As we passed by these curious animals, I was able to examine them at leisure, for they did not stir. Their skin was thick and furrowed with reddish tan in color. Their fur was short and sparse. Some of them were 13 feet long. Quieter and less timid than their northern cousins, they did not post sentries to guard the approaches to their camp. After observing this colony of walruses, I thought of returning. It was 11 o'clock, and if Captain Nemo found the weather favorable to take our bearings, I wanted to be present. However, I had not much hope that the sun would appear that day. Heavy clouds on the horizon still hid it from us. It seemed as if the sun were jealous and did not wish to reveal the secrets of this inaccessible part of the globe to man. Nevertheless, I decided to go back to the Nautilus, and we followed a narrow path along the top of the cliff. At 11:30, we reached the boat, which had since brought the captain ashore. I could see him standing on the block of basalt with the instruments beside him. His eyes were fixed on the northern horizon, near which the sun was describing its long arc. I took up my position beside him and watched without saying a word. Noon came, and, as the day before, the sun did not appear. This was a grave setback, for we had not yet taken our bearings. If we could not be done during the following day, we should have to give up all attempts to establish our position. It was the 20th of March, and tomorrow would be the 21st, the equinox, and the sun would drop below the horizon for 6 months, and the long polar night would begin. Since the September equinox, it had emerged from the northern horizon and had risen in long spirals up to the 21st of December. At that period, the summer solstice of the northern region had begun to descend, and the next day it would shed its last rays on those regions. I expressed my thoughts and fears to Captain Nemo. "You are right, Monsieur Arenal," he said to me. "If I cannot observe the sun at its highest point tomorrow, I will not be able to do so again for another 6 months. On the other hand, since chance has brought us into these waters on the 21st of March, it should be easy to determine our position if the sun comes out at noon." "Why, Captain?" "Because when the sun describes such long spirals, it is difficult to measure its exact height above the horizon, and instruments can make serious errors." "So what do you intend to do?" I shall use my chronometer," replied the captain. "If tomorrow, March 21st at noon, after taking in consideration the refraction, of course, the sun's disk is cut exactly in two by the northern horizon, then I know that I am at the South Pole." "That is true," I said. "However, that statement is not mathematically accurate, because the equinox does not necessarily occur at midday." "That is so, Professor, but the margins of error cannot be more than 100 yards, and that is good enough for us. So, until tomorrow." Captain Nemo returned to his ship, while Conseil and I stayed behind until 5 o'clock, walking up and down the beach, observing and studying. I found no unusual objects except for a penguin's egg. Remarkable for its size, for which a collector could have paid more than 1,000 francs. It was cream-colored, with stripes and markings like so many hieroglyphs, a rare trinket indeed. I gave it to Conceal to take care of, and the patent. Oh my God! And the patient, good-footed fellow, holding it as cautiously as if it had been a precious piece of Chinese porcelain, brought it back intact to the Nautilus. There I put this rare egg in one of the museum showcases. I had an excellent supper, consisting of a piece of seal's liver whose taste reminded me of pork. Then I went to bed, not forgetting to invoke, like an Indian, the favors of the sun. The next day, the 21st of March, I was in the platform at 5 o'clock in the morning. Captain Nemo was almost there. The next day, on the 21st of March, I was up on the platform at 5 o'clock in the morning. Captain Nemo was already there. "The weather is breaking up a bit," he said. "I have high hopes. After breakfast, we will go ashore and choose an observation post." Having made this arrangement, I went to find Ned Land. I should have liked to take him with me, but the obstinate Canadian refused, and I could see that he was becoming more taciturn and more ill-tempered every day. Actually, under the circumstances, I did not mind his refusal, because there were too many seals lying about ashore, and it was best not to expose his thoughtless fishermen to such a temptation. After breakfast, I went ashore. The Nautilus had cruised a few miles further south during the night. It was now more than 3 miles out to sea, off a coastline dominated by a sharp peak, 12 to 1,500 feet wide. The dinghy carried me, Captain Nemo, 2 members of the crew, and the instruments, a chronometer, a telescope, and a barometer. During our crossing, I saw numerous whales belonging to the 3 species particular to the southern waters: the true whale, the right whale, as it is known in English, with no dorsal fin, the humpback whale, with a wrinkled belly and large whitish fins which resemble wings, and the finback, a yellowish-brown whale, the livelihood of all whales. This powerful animal could be heard a long way off when it sent columns of air and vapor to a great height, resembling spirals of smoke. These various mammals were frolicking about in herds in the quiet waters, and I realized that this Atlantic basin was now serving as a refuge for whales hunted by the whalers. I noticed also long whitish rows of salpae, a kind of mollusk that live in colonies, as well as an immense jellyfish which drifted about in the surf. At 9 o'clock, we reached the land. The sky was growing brighter, and the clouds were scurrying away southward. The mist was rising from the cold surface of the water. Captain Nemo made his way toward the high peak, where he doubtless wanted to make an observation. It was a difficult climb up the sharp-edged lava and the pumice stone, and an atmosphere often filled with sulfur fumes that rose from the crevices. For a man unaccustomed to walking on land, the captain was scaling the steepest slopes with a suppleness and agility that I found difficult to match, and which would have been envied by a hunter of chamois. It took us 2 hours to reach the summit of this peak, which consisted of a mixture of porphyry and basalt. From there, our eyes could see a vast sea that stretched in front of the northern horizon as far as the eyes could see. Below us were fields of dazzling whiteness. Overhead, the sky was a pale blue, without mist. In the north, the sun, like a ball of fire, was already sinking below the horizon. Whales playing in the water below us spouted hundreds of liquid jets that resembled flowers, which spread like fireworks. In the distance, the Nautilus looked like a sleeping Cretan. Behind us, toward the south and east, lay an immense expanse of land, a chaotic accumulation of rocks and ice, extending as far as our eyes could see. Captain Nemo, on reaching the summit, carefully noted our altitude by means of the barometer, for he had to take this into consideration to determine our position. At 11:45, the sun, like a golden disk, and visible now only by refraction, was shedding its last rays over the deserted continent and over these seas never before seen by man. Captain Nemo, using a special telescope that corrected refraction by means of a mirror, watched the sun sinking below the horizon, moving on a long diagonal path. I held the chronometer. My heart was pounding with excitement. And the disappearance of the semicircle of the sun coincided with noon on the chronometer. We were at the pole. "Noon!" I cried. "The South Pole," replied Captain Nemo in a grave voice as he handed me the telescope, through which he showed the sun exactly bisected by the horizon. I watched the last rays of the sun crowning the peak of the mountain, when the shadows gradually rising on its slope. At that moment, Captain Nemo, putting his hand on my shoulder, said, "Monsieur, in 1600 the Dutchman Garrick, driven by storms and currents, reached the 64th parallel and discovered New Shetland. In 1773, on the 17th of January, the illustrious Cook, following the 85th meridian, reached latitude 67 and degrees 30 minutes south, and in the following year, 1776, on the 13th of January, on the 109th meridian, he reaches a latitude 71 degrees 15 minutes. In 1819, the Russian Bellinghaunt reached the 69th panel, and in 1821, the 76th at 111 degrees longitude west. In 1820, the Englishman Bruntsfield was stopped at the 65th parallel. That same year, 1820, oh my god, this is going to go on for the rest of the page. I don't want to keep reading these random dates. In 1825, the Englishman could not get beyond the 62nd parallel. That same year, 1825, a simple 72 degrees 14 minutes latitude on the 25th meridian, as far as 74th degrees 15 minutes on the 36th meridian. In 1829, the Englishman Forster, commander of the Chanticleer, took possession of the Antarctic continent at 63 degrees 26 minutes latitude and 66 degrees 26 minutes longitude. In 1831, the Englishman Biscoe, on the 1st of February, discovered Enderby in latitude 68 degrees 50 minutes south. In 1832, on the 5th of February, he discovered Adelaide at 67 degrees latitude, and on the 21st of February, Graham at the 64 degrees 45 minutes. In 1838, the Frenchman Dumont Urville was stopped by the Great Ice Barrier at 62 degrees 57 minutes southward, but took the bearings of the land Louis Philippe. 2 years later, in a new attempt, he discovered on the 21st of January, Adelaide at 26 degrees 30 minutes, and 8 days later, at 64 degrees 40 minutes, Clare Coast. In 1838, The Englishman Wilkes advanced to the 69th parallel on the 100th meridian. In 1839, the Englishman Balleny discovered Sabrina on the edge of the Antarctic Circle. Finally, in 1842, on the 12th of January, James Ross, also an Englishman, commanded the Erebus and Terror, discovered the Victoria Land, and on the 23rd of the same month he reached the 47th parallel, the farthest point reached up to that time. On the 27th, he was at 76 degrees 8 minutes, and on the 28th, at 77 degrees 32 minutes, and on the 2nd of February, 78 degrees and 4 minutes. Later in the year 1842, and now, on March 21st, 1868, I, Captain Nemo, have reached the South Pole at a latitude of 90 degrees, and I am taking possession of this part of the earth, an area equal to 1/6 of all known continents. In the name of whom, Captain? Mine, sir. Captain Nemo unfurled a black banner bearing the letter N embroidered in gold. Then, turning toward the sun, whose last rays were faintly rippled on the horizon, he exclaimed, "Farewell, sun! Retire, O radiant star! Rest beneath this open sea, and let the shadows of the long night fall upon my new domain." Wow, I've never seen Captain Nemo act so possessive. Anyway, that was the end of chapter 14. All right, so the South Pole has been discovered and claimed by Captain Nemo. Okay. This chapter is called Accident or Incident. Ooh, what thought-provoking chapter title. Okay. Accident or Incident. The next day, the 22nd of March, at 6 o'clock in the morning, preparations were begun for our departure. The last glimmers of twilight were blending into the night. It was bitterly cold. The stars were shining with unusual intensity. Above our heads, the beautiful Southern Cross, the polar star of the Antarctic, glittered brilliantly. The thermometer registered at 12 degrees below 0 Celsius, or 9 degrees above 0 Fahrenheit, and where the wind blew, it was biting cold. The ice floes were becoming more numerous, the sea was beginning to freeze everywhere, and blackish patches on the surface of the water indicated that fresh ice would soon be forming. Evidently, this southern basin was frozen over during 6 months of winter, when it became completely inaccessible. What did the whales do during this period? More probably, they swam under the ice barrier to look for clearer waters. The seals and walruses, accustomed to living in the coldest climates, however, remained in these icy regions. These creatures instinctively dig holes in the ice field and keep them open, so that when they are in the water, they can always come up to these holes for air. When birds, driven by the cold, have migrated northward, these sea mammals remained the sole masters of the polar continent. Meanwhile, the water tanks had been filled. The Nautilus was slowly diving. When she reached a depth of 1,000 feet, she stopped. Her propeller began to churn, and she headed straight north at the speed of 15 knots. When evening fell, we were sailing beneath the immense icy shell of the ice shelf. The panels of the saloon had been closed, in case the Nautilus would collide with blocks of submerged ice. I spent the day putting my notes in order. My mind was completely occupied with memories of the South Pole. We had reached that inaccessible point without undue effort and without danger, as if our floating craft 372. As if our floating craft had been traveling on rails, and now we were actually on our way back. Would our return journey bring as many surprises? I expected it would, for this world beneath the sea is an inexhaustible source of wonders. During the 5.5 months that fate had cast on us aboard the Nautilus, we had traveled 14,000 leagues, and on this long voyage, longer than the circle of the earth at the equator, we had been fascinated by many incidents, both strange and frightening. The hunting excursion in the forest of Crespo, our running along the Torres Strait, the coral burial underground, the sea-long pearl fisheries, the Arabian Tunnel, the volcanic eruption of Santoine Island, and millions in Vigo Bay, Atlantis, the South Pole. All these memories, one after another, haunted me in the succession of dreams which disturbed my slumber all night long. So yeah, 20,000 leagues, I guess, is like the total that they went on the whole journey. So that's cool. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I was awakened by a violent shock. I sat up in bed, listening in the dark, when suddenly I was thrown into the middle of the room. Evidently, the Nautilus had collided with something, had rebounded, and heeled over at an angle. I felt my way along the walls and corridors to the saloon, which was lit by its ceiling lights. The furniture had been overturned, but fortunately the showcases, whose legs were firmly attached, had stood up to the shock. The pictures on the starboard side were no longer hanging, but were flat against the wall, while those on the port side dangled outward so that their lower edges were a foot away from the wall. While those on the port side dangled outward so that their lower edges were a foot away from the wall. The Nautilus was then lying on her starboard side and, furthermore, completely motionless. I could hear the sound of footsteps and confused sounds of voices, but Captain Nemo did not appear. I was just about to leave the saloon when Ned Land and Conseil came in. "What has happened?" I asked them. "I was coming to ask Monsieur that," replied Conseil. "Confound it," replied the Canadian. "I know very well what's happening. The Nautilus has hit something, and judging by the way she's lying, I don't think she'll get out of this as easily as she did in the Torres Strait." "But at least we are on the surface," I asked. "We don't know that. We don't know." Replied the Conseil. "We don't know," replied Conseil. "That is easy enough to find out," I said. I looked at the manometer. Much to my surprise, it indicated a depth of 1,080 feet. "What can all this mean?" I exclaimed. "We'd better ask the captain." "Captain Nemo," said Conseil. "But where can we find him?" asked Ned Land. "Follow me," I said to my two companions. We left the saloon. There was no one in the library. There was no one near the staircase, nor near the crew's quarters. I thought Captain Nemo must be in the pilot's cage. It was best to wait. We returned to the saloon. I shall pass over the Canadian's recriminations without comment. This was a good opportunity for him to let off steam, and I let him vent till his humor to the full without answering back. We had remained like that for about 20 minutes, waiting to pick up the slightest sound inside the Nautilus. Then Captain Nemo came in. He seemed not to see us. His face, usually so impassive, betrayed signs of anxiety. Slightly, he checked the compass and the manometer. Then he went over and placed his finger at a point on the planisphere and the region of the Antarctic. I did not want to interrupt him. However, when he turned toward me a few minutes later, I used an expression that he himself had used in the Torres Strait. "Just an incident, Captain?" "No, Monsieur. This time it is an accident." "Is it serious?" "Perhaps." "Any immediate danger?" "No." "Is the Nautilus stranded?" "Yes." "How did it happen?" "Not through our incompetence, but by a trick in nature. There were no errors in our maneuvers. Nevertheless, the laws of equilibrium, that what they are, we can defy human laws, but not the laws of nature. Captain Nemo had chosen a strange moment indeed to philosophize. Moreover, his reply told me nothing. "May I know, Captain," I asked him, "the cause of this incident?" "An enormous block of ice, a mountain turned over," he replied. "When icebergs are undetermined by warmer waters or by repeated collisions, their center of gravity rises, and the result that they overturn completely. That is what happened. One of these icebergs turned over and struck the Nautilus, which was cruising beneath the surface. After striking us, the iceberg slipped under its hull and lifted it with an irresistible force. We are now lying on our side, at a higher level." "But can we not free the Nautilus by emptying her tanks and restoring her balance?" "That is just what we are doing at this moment, monsieur. Can you hear the pumps working? Look at the needle on the manometer. It shows that the Nautilus is rising, but the mass of ice underneath it is rising with it. Until some obstacle stops this upward movement, our position cannot change." And in fact, the Nautilus was maintaining her list to starboard. Probably she would right herself when the icebergs stopped rising, but at the moment it was quite possible that we might strike the lower edge of the ice shelf itself, and we might be horribly crushed between two masses of ice. I kept thinking over all the possible consequences of our situation. Captain Nemo did not take his eyes off the manometer. Since the iceberg had turned over, the Nautilus had risen about 150 feet, but she was still lying at the same angle. Suddenly we felt a slight movement in the hull. Evidently, the Nautilus was straightened up a bit. The objects of the saloon that had been hanging in the mid-air were slowly returning to their normal position. The walls were resuming their vertical position. None of us spoke. With beating hearts, we could see and feel this movement. The floor was once more becoming horizontal beneath our feet. 10 minutes went by. "We are standing upright at last!" I cried. "Yes," said Captain Nemo, moving toward the door of the room. "Well, will we be able to float again?" I asked him. "Certainly," he replied. "As soon as the tanks have been emptied, the Nautilus will rise to the surface." The captain went out, and I soon realized that he had given orders to halt the rise of the Nautilus. Had he not done so, we should soon have been stuck on the underside of the ice barrier. It was better to remain free in the water between the masses of ice. "That is my narrow escape," said Conseil. "Yes, we could have easily been squashed between those two masses of ice, or at least shut in by them. Then, with no means of replenishing our air, yes, indeed, we had a narrow escape." "If that's the end of it," muttered Ned Land. I did not want to get into that pointless argument with the Canadian, so I did not reply. Moreover, the panels opened at that moment, and the light from the outside poured in through the panels. Here we were, thoroughly immersed, suspended in the water. 30 feet away on each side of the Nautilus there rose a dazzling water of ice. Above us, the vast bottom of the ice barrier formed an immense ceiling. Below us, the iceberg that had capsized, having slid slowly around, had come to the rest of the base on the two lateral walls and was firmly lodged there. The Nautilus was now a prisoner in the veritable tunnel of ice about 60 feet wide, filled with calm water. Moreover, the Nautilus could move either forward or backward, and then dive several hundred yards deeper, and continue its journey in an open passage under the ice barrier. Although the light of the saloon had been turned off, the room was flooded with a brilliant light. It was the powerful reflection of the beams of our searchlight playing on those walls of ice. I could not perfectly describe the effects of those beams as they fell on those masses of ice cut into every shape and form, every angle, every ridge, every facet reflecting a different shade of color depending on the nature of the veins running through it. Imagine a brilliant display of precious, dazzling gems, especially sapphires, casting and fusing their jets of blue with jets of green emeralds. Here and there, pale shades of infinite mellowness mingled with the sparkling, fiery eyes could not endure it. The rays of our searchlight were intensified 100-fold, just like rays of a powerful beacon passing through lenticular lenses. "How beautiful! How magnificent!" exclaimed Conseil. "Yes," I said, "it is a magnificent sight. Don't you think so, Ned?" "Yes, it is, confound it," replied Ned Land. "It's superb, I hate to admit it. I've never seen anything like it. But we may have to pay dearly for this show, and if I must say so, I think we are looking at things God never intended man to see." Ned was right. It was too beautiful. Suddenly, a cry from Conseil made me turn around. "What is the matter?" I asked. "Monsieur should close his eyes. Monsieur should not look." As he said this, Conseil covered his eyes with his hands. "What is the matter, my boy?" "I cannot see. I'm blinded." Involuntarily, I looked out the window, but I could not stand the blazing light coming into the room. Then I realized what had happened. The Nautilus had just increased her speed, and all the quiet reflections on the walls of ice had suddenly changed into brilliant flashes of lightning. All those dazzling, fiery reflections had merged together. The Nautilus, driven at great speed, was sailing below a sheath of lightning. Then the panels of the saloon were closed. We had to hold our hands over our eyes for our vision to be affected by concentric lights caused by the bright rays, and it took some time for our troubled eyes to recover. Finally, however, we uncovered our eyes. "Great heavens! I should not have believed it," said Conseil. "And I still don't believe it," said the Canadian. "When we get back on land," continued Conseil, "we will be so spoiled by all these marvels of nature that we will not think so much of those wretched countries created by the hand of man. No, the world and its inhabitants will no longer be worthy of us." These words, coming from the lips of a stolid Fleming, showed how excited and enthusiastic we had become. But the Canadian lost no time in pouring cold water on our enthusiasm. "The world and its people," he said, shaking his head. "Don't worry, friend Conseil, we'll never see it again." It was 5 o'clock in the morning. Suddenly there was a shock at the bow of the Nautilus. I realized that her spur had spun into a block of ice. It must have been due to an error in maneuvering, for this underwater tunnel, obstructed here and there by ice, was difficult to navigate. I thought Captain Nemo would alter his course and circumvent these obstacles, or else follow the twisting and turnings of the tunnel. In any case, the path ahead could not be completely blocked. Contrary to my expectations, however, the Nautilus went into reverse. "Are we cruising backward?" asked Conseil. "Yes," I replied. "The tunnel must be blocked at this end." "So, what do we do now?" "So," I said, "it is quite simple. We will retrace our steps and leave through the southern end." In saying this, I wanted to appear more confident than I really was. In the meanwhile, the Nautilus was still cruising backward and picking up speed. "We will be losing time," said Ned. "A few hours, more or less, will not matter as long as we get out." "Yes, provided we do get out." remarked Ned. A few minutes later, I walked into the library. My companions sat in silence. I stretched on a sofa, picking up a book, and scanned its pages without thinking. A quarter of an hour later, Conseil came up to me and said, "Is that book Monsieur is reading interesting?" "Very interesting," I replied. "I can well believe it. Monsieur is reading Monsieur's own book." My own book? And indeed I was, for the book I held in my hand was none other than The Great Ocean Depths, and I had not been aware of it. What? No way. I hate that. That's my least favorite thing that's happened in this book so far. He's reading his own book and he doesn't know? Come on. I closed the book and continued to pace up and down. Ned and Conseil got up to go to their room. "Stay here, my friends," I said, motioning to them not to go. "Let us stay together until we get out of this tunnel." "As Monsieur wishes," replied Conseil. Several hours went by, and I kept looking at the instruments hanging on the wall of the saloon. The manometer showed that the Nautilus was keeping at a constant depth of over 900 feet. The compass indicated that she was still heading south. The log showed her pace speed was 20 knots. Too fast is such a narrow space. But Captain Nemo knew perfectly well that he had no time to lose under the circumstances, for every minute was worth a century. At 8:25 there was a second collision. This time it was in the rear. I turned pale. My companions came closer. I took Conseil by the hand. We looked at each other questioningly. Our looks betrayed our thoughts more than any words could have done. At that moment, the captain entered the saloon. I went over to him. "Is the route to the south blocked also?" I asked. "Yes, Professor. When the icebergs turned over, it sealed off all openings." "So, we are trapped?" "Yes." Ooh, okay, that was chapter 15. What a freaking cliffhanger. Oh my god. Wow, that was a good chapter. And yeah, what a thing to end on. My god, they're literally trapped in ice. That is wild. Okay, wow. Guys, we're almost done the book. We're at page 375 of about 450. So less than 100 pages to go. 373. Okay, let's mark that in Storygraph and see how far we are. 78% of the way. Okay, thank you to everyone that tuned in today and hung out. I will be back possibly tomorrow morning for a writing stream. So I will see you then. And yeah, have a lovely night. All right, signing off. Bye bye.